I see people are still coming in, but as it's 9:30, I think it's best to start this session. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this session on governing MaaS. My name is Mirjam Koopman. I work at the province of Gelderland, and I'll be moderating this session today. Governing MaaS is an important topic because the concept of MaaS offers a lot of possibilities to make the way in which we travel more flexible and more efficient, but it also poses a few threats. Because what happens if MaaS nudges people, MaaS apps nudge people towards modes of transportation which are less desirable from a societal point of view. So how do we make sure that MaaS helps us to reach societal goals such as safety, accessibility and sustainability? That's what we will be discussing today. And we have speakers today who will give their point of view from different perspectives. But first, I'll take you through a few housekeeping practicalities. We won't be able to have a direct conversation in this session, but you can ask your questions. And if you want to ask questions, you go to chat and then to session and type them there. And I will be helped by Karen Verkluijsen and Laura Baujo from POLIS if there are too many questions. And if your questions can't be answered, they will stay in the chat. So you can have them answered afterwards, or you can direct message the speakers, maybe to get into a conversation with them. We'll be doing a short poll, and to view the poll, you have to go to polls and then session, and then you can put in your vote. To view who is attending, you can click on people and then session, and you see who's attending this session. And to maximize the screen, you can hide the chat or double click on the presentation or the speaker. And after the session, you can try networking via the networking function and visit the exhibition area. So now I will introduce the speakers who will be talking about MaaS today. The first speaker is Thomas Delezon, who works at the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and he'll be talking about MaaS from a private sector point of view. Next will be Tim Asperges, City of Leuven, and after that, Richard van der Wulp, City of Rotterdam, and Marc van der Burg, the City of The Hague, all people who work at cities. And then last, Rahel Känel works at the Swiss Federal Railways and talk about the project she's doing there. So before we start with the session, I would like to ask you to go to polls, so we can see who's joining the session today. So can you please enter from which organization you are? Laura, I can't seem to see the results. Can you show the results? Well, maybe later then. I best introduce the first speaker then, which is Thomas Delezon. Thomas Delezon is Director Mobility at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and which is a CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. And before that, Thomas worked at Nissan in various roles. Thomas will talk about a study his organization conducted on mobility as a service together with ITF. Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mirjam, and thank you very much to POLIS for having me participating to this discussion, which when I look at the lineup of speakers is promising to be extremely interesting. Indeed, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the ITF, the International Transport Forum, have started some work in 2020 related to the new mobility landscape and the case for mobility as a service, trying to understand how the overall mobility is evolving and what's the role of mobility as a service and how can we use mobility as a service to make urban mobility more sustainable. And so the report is not yet available and will be shared in 2021. Today with you is essentially to share some of the early conclusions. There are no definitive answers, as with every innovative topic in mobility. And as with every mobility topic, it is a little bit of a complex discussion. But bear with me, and I will try to initiate some of the key findings, or share the key findings and initiate a discussion. So the first thing is it sounds very basic to say, but it is obvious and it is now quantified in scenario making across the world that shared mobility, and ideally in a coordinated and efficient way, as well as non-motorized mobility and micro-mobility, is essential to achieve the objective of sustainable mobility, namely clean mobility and efficient mobility, and therefore to achieve decarbonization in line with the Paris Agreement and the goals that we all have to embrace together. And so that's a very important fact, because it means that we need to care for the shared mobility and the new mobility services. And in fact, we all understand how deep is the transformation that is implied by the new mobility services, the digital mobility services. It's not just about people clicking on their phones to select another route or another mode. It's a much deeper ecosystem and system transformation, and it's extremely complex. And this is proven by the diversity of mobility as a service forms and type of models that are emerging in Europe and beyond, as well as the related externalities, which indeed have to ask the question, how do we make mobility as a service a part of our common sustainability objective? And so when it comes to finding the ways to make mobility as a service really align with the sustainability objective, governance is clearly one of the key points that comes up. And the first thing is it's probably as urgent and as important for everyone to consider governance as much a priority or as important as the technology and the technological bricks that are making mobility as a service possible, and the related infrastructure, which we should not forget is a fundamental building block of a truly integrated mobility as a service that is core to urban mobility system. And as usual in mobility, all these elements are interdependent. So talking about governance, and I would say a little bit in a classical way, it always starts with a vision. And the vision, which means what modes need to be prioritized in an area, and their mix will serve a specific objective that needs to be defined at the local and the regional level. And it's about finding ways to better manage mobility on the short term and the modal mix, the incentives, etc., but also the longer term and planning the needs for a more sustainable mobility and improving access overall. So it's clear that the governance of mobility as a service does need different layers, different, I would say, topics that are managed by different groups within the same deciding body. The technology itself is part of the governance, and because the technology and who operates it plays an important role in shaping this governance, it's at least in the current state of things, and we see it continuing, especially with the ticketing, the telecom, the user experience, the mapping, and of course, at the very center of it, the data in this bigger term, with the ownership and the usage of data being at the core of the governance and how this is going to be organized. It is also important to remember that the reason why technological bricks and the owners of these bricks will be part of the governance is because MaaS has a cost, and therefore who invests in MaaS needs to be able to also live from it. The other element that is obviously at the core of the governance of mobility as a service is value. And by value, we mean who does MaaS contributes to, what does it bring and to who? is, as I said, at the core of what will govern MaaS. And it's also at the core of how to create trust. We often hear this notion of trust, but in fact, trust is the mechanism in which the governance needs to be working. It's what the governance needs to create, this trust that will enable collaboration to create value by changing the behaviors. So maybe environmental value, social value, but also economic value, which obviously is important, as I said, to enable sustainability of MaaS as a model. The boundaries of the governance are clearly existing, and this is about privacy, this is about ethics, it's about enabling innovation, and so therefore doesn't need to be too constraining. It's about the service levels and guaranteeing the service levels of the system of mobility as it is being delivered now. It cannot deteriorate it. And of course, security. All of that are the boundaries. And there are also a couple of enablers of the governance, obviously the agreements, the technical capacity. I come back to the topic of trust, which is clearly an enabler. And as I said, we need to think about the way the governance is established across the various parties that are composing mobility as a service in a way that will allow the distribution of value, the management of objectives, and the coordinated delivery of the services that is MaaS. And so really, what we are looking at with the governance of mobility as a service, and like every topic that is so innovative, we will have to test and learn. This is something that is moving as we speak. And so what we are looking at is really the governance of new digital mobility services, which indeed will ask us a little bit more effort to transition from what we used to know in breaking silos, in finding the new forms of partnerships that are not only established on concessions or licensing, but also the new rules of the game for the private sector. It's about sharing data, it's about social objectives, but the new ways of financing also for the financing sector and the public sector, as well as obviously the new narrative. What does MaaS bring in the public sector is the need to change the way things used to be managed, and therefore adapt to this new narrative in the public institutions too. So I think we have with MaaS a great opportunity to achieve sustainable mobility, but governance being the most complex element of it, we do have some conclusions that are emerging, and I just tried to provide them to you, but still have some questions that are out there, and I'm keen on actually engaging with you today to try to answer those. And so probably back to you, Mirjam, for the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Are there any questions for Thomas? I have a question, Thomas. You were talking about a deciding body. What are your views on that deciding body? Who is that? A public sector organization? Is it, or is it maybe a mix?
You may not like my answer, but that's what I said. Is it's down to what you want to achieve with the MaaS. Yeah, MaaS is just a tool, and in some regions, probably Europe, where public transit is already extremely present and developed, it may sound logical to think about MaaS where public transit has a role or a leading role. In some other regions, public transit or public authorities will perhaps have a lesser role, because the way the transport system is organized and what MaaS will bring will probably rely more on the capacities of the private sector. I am personally a believer in the fact that public authorities should always be involved in different levels of authority or responsibility, because, as I said, mobility as a service is a way to provide access. This is about transport. It's about minimum service level and equity of access to many of the population. So there is a dimension of common rule, common objective for the wider public good that needs to be ensured by a level of public service authority, but not necessarily the leading role. And it all depends on what MaaS is supposed to achieve according to us.
Are there any other questions? Sorry. I can't see any question. I hope I'm not missing anything.
There was a question from a lady called Françoise Gaspard, and I think we just answered it with the public sector.
Okay.
If it's about the goals of sustainability, I think sustainability is not a topic that only the public sector has to act on. It's a private sector topic too. And indeed, as I said, there are some changes that need to happen also on the private sector. For example, with the idea of sharing data so that we achieve social objectives and that we look at social value, not just economical value. This is the kind of change that we think is important, that is happening. And we want to make sure that the governance of MaaS is embracing these and enabling the trust that allows this mutual responsibility to occur.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I think it's time for our next speaker, which is Tim Asperges' team.
Thank you.
Tim is an urban planner with expertise in urban mobility for over 20 years. And since 2014, he's working as an expert advisor for the city of Leuven, where he prepared a very ambitious plan, which Tim transformed Leuven into a cycling city #1 in Belgium. As a mid-sized city with an important university, Tim positions Leuven as a living lab for urban mobility transition. And he will tell us now about MaaS for citizens via third-party payment schemes. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll explain what kind of role a mid-sized city is playing in the field of cooperation with the new mobility services and also using the instrument or the tool of MaaS. And within that context, it's important to know the city of Leuven, we are, like I explained, a mid-sized city, around 100,000 inhabitants. But what is special about Leuven is that we have also 65,000 students because we have a very important university. And within that context, we are a really dynamic city where a lot of things are possible, also on the level of innovation in urban transport. We also recently won the prize of being the European Eye Capital of 2020. Not because of we are really inventing a lot of new rocket science, but really because of the reason that we are cooperating with a lot of actors in the field and implement a lot of innovations related to transport, for instance. Within that context, like many European cities, Leuven is a city where inhabitants, students, and jobs are increasing, which also means that we cope with the huge challenge of traffic congestion. And like I already explained, within the context of the city itself, we really are already more or less a cycling city. In our heart of the city, 40% of trips are made by bicycle. But on the regional level, we really cope with a challenge of traffic congestion. And in that perspective, intermodality and using shared mobility services in the chain of public transport together with shared mobility services is a key element in Leuven. Important red line or green line is that we have the challenge of becoming a climate neutral city by 2030. And that we are not doing that alone. There is really a cooperation model with the city, the businesses, the academics, and also the inhabitants. And that cooperation model was more or less the reason why we won this Eye Capital prize. And in the ambition of transport, we really know to be accessible in the future, we need to double cycle trips, double public transport trips. And then key elements in how we are using shared mobility services is that for the short trips, we don't use them. Short trips, 0 to 15 kilometers, there our vision is the normal bike and walking is the main transport modes. Within the reason of these longer trips, we want to give an alternative of changing car use by these new mobility services combined with walking. In that perspective, there is already a quite big overview or big supply of car sharing. We are car sharing city number 1 in Belgium. Car sharing is also increasing every year. And related to shared bicycles, we also have a clear vision that we really welcome shared bicycle systems, but not in a free-floating basis and not for all trips, but especially for the combination of these longer trips as an alternative. There are the different systems, for instance, the back-to-one public bicycle system at our main transport hubs, which you can use, the blue bike. Then we have special for children where you can have a bike, and when your children is growing up, you will have another bike, and there's a full service contract for a very high level bicycle for that, for only €60 per year for inhabitants and €12 a year for social target groups. We have a buggy booker system, not only bikes, but you can also have a buggy when you come with a bike and your little children to the city center. You can have also a free buggy. We have implemented recently the cargo bike system, sharing system in the city of Leuven with the partner Cargo. And also an electrical bike sharing system is now on stage. What we do not welcome in Leuven is the free-floating systems, because free-floating is suggesting door-to-door, and the only transport modes who can challenge that is walking. Within that context, we have a very clear vision. We are now working out mobility points where we have spatial clusters of all our shared mobility services at these Mobi points. We are rolling out now around 50 in the city of Leuven with the overview of all the shared mobility services. And we did also make clear rules who is welcome and who is not welcome, and what kind of service levels you have to fulfill to use our public domain as a shared mobility operator. That are concession rules that are focusing on data, on space use, on the service quality, but those who don't fulfill these service levels, they don't get a permit. And that's why at this moment the hardware. Then I come to the software, and that is how we are also welcoming the tool of MaaS. We have done a research project where we have developed a system where we are integrating third payment services in MaaS apps. And what is this thing, third payment services? We want that transport for all is also real life, so that people that also can't afford more or less the price to use the new mobility services, they get a discount paid by the city, and that discount is automatically integrated in our shared mobility services and the MaaS apps that fulfill some service levels. And what we have defined, so we already had these third payment services separately, but it costs a lot of time and energy to have these separate contracts with all these operators. Now we are going to integrate it in MaaS providers. And step 1, we have the rules for our shared mobility services, so the service levels. Step 2, we also have some rules for the MaaS suppliers. MaaS suppliers that don't want to offer the complete package of transport in Leuven, they are not going to get these third payment services as an incentive. And what we have developed is an editor machine, let's call it like that, who is reading our rules, who's translating that to systems that automatically is going to integrate it, the different rules, who can make use of the third payment services in the different apps. And the rule engine is then automatically going to see, is this inhabitant fulfilling some rules to get this discount? If yes, then the rule engine is going to automatically integrate it in the different shared mobility services or in the MaaS apps. And at the end, the city will get a report and also the invoice to pay to the MaaS supplier or the shared mobility supplier. This project is coming to an end now. We have developed the rule engine, which automatically is connecting that in all these systems. We have tested it with some shared mobility providers, but we are now looking for living it up to a more mainstream approach. And in the next months, we try to also prepare some proposals on that, both on the regional level in Flanders, but also on the European level, in which way we could level up this way of automatically integrating third payment services in MaaS or shared mobility services, with the goal to offer transport for all, so that also social vulnerable groups can afford the shared mobility or the complete mobility package which cities are offering. And that's the last slide, which is giving more or less the overview of the whole MaaS ecosystem, where you see also the balance between what kind of role the local authority could play and what kind of role the industry can play. The local authority is going to dedicate how the public domain is going to be used and who is welcome and who is not, based on some service levels. We did the same also related to MaaS providers. They can have the incentive of being paid for some groups offering the shared mobility and the complete mobility package. And we developed some rule engines that all operators that fulfill our service levels can use. Thanks for that. That was my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Tim. It's interesting talk. We have a question from Ron Bunau to you. With so many students, and since students do not have much money, where does your funding come from?
Also related to the public transport offer, but also the shared mobility offer. We have for our students, together with the university, a very interesting season ticket. So the students pay €20 a year to get access to our public transport. And we are now preparing to expand that season ticket, where they probably will have to pay €5 extra, so €25 a year. And then they will get access to also both public transport and all our shared mobility services. And then who is paying the rest? The rest is paid by the city of Leuven, the University of Leuven, and the public transport operator who is offering a very low price for the trips, which we then pay to the public transport operator. So it's more or less a package of different partners who are going to pay for also the complete transport package for our students.
Thank you. Next question is from Thomas Delezon. What is the adherence of the service and with which segment of Leuven? And well done on the rule. How does that connect to taxes and social support system? Do you understand the question?
No.
No. I think there are several questions in one. What's the adherence of the service and with which segment of Leuven? Is it in the whole city of Leuven?
Yeah. So what we are doing now is so these MOBI points, which are the clustering of our shared mobility services. We are rolling them out in the city center, but in 2021, so next year, they will be expanded in the whole area of the city of Leuven. And again, what was the other question? And which segment of Leuven? Yes.
Yes. And what is the adherence? How many people use it? I think.
How many people? I have no figure on that now. But just to explain, the blue bike, that's already a system which is already active many years in Leuven, and that's a really high success. Also, the car sharing system, 3 people in 100 are using car sharing in Leuven. The cargo bike and the e-bike are at this moment new in Leuven. So we started with that offer in September. So it's a little bit too early to explain that this is a huge success or not.
Okay. And Thomas posted a new question. I think to explain his former question, how many people downloaded the app and of what age group?
Yeah, I don't have a figure on that, but what is important in the project which we have done in the last months is that we first of all have developed the service levels rules for shared mobility providers and MaaS apps. And MaaS apps, we are not interfering in the MaaS role because we are just Leuven, but MaaS apps that fulfill some service levels, they can use the third payment API system to expand the mass of people that are going to use their app. And what we have developed is the editor to read our boring rules, to translate our boring rules to a rule engine. And this rule engine is going to automatically dedicate if the client is fulfilling the rules and if the city has to go to pay the third payment service to the provider. So that rule engine is really the core of the project which we have been doing. And it ended in more or less a test phase. It's not already at mainstream level, but I believe we have a very interesting thing developed now, which we really would like to upscale in other cities in the region and everywhere.
Well, one last question. Someone asked, the whole system seems a bit complicated. What about the role of information and communication through different channels?
It looks that the whole system looks complicated, but the end user is not seeing anything about that. The end user just has to see what is the mobility offer in Leuven. You have the blue bike, you have the Cargiro, you have the Urbi, and you have public transport. They use an app, or they do a MaaS app, or they use the separate apps of the mobility providers. But for the rest, the end user is not seeing anything about what is being done back office. So I admit it's a little bit complicated, but we also want to have something which is automatically doing a lot of tasks which the local authority doesn't have to do anymore. Of course, we have to stay in control, but there are a lot of administrative actions which we can exclude by having this rule engine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think we'll go to the next speakers, which are Marc from the Burg and Richard van der Wulp. And Marc works for the municipality of The Hague as a policy advisor on smart mobility. And Richard works at the City of Rotterdam Traffic and Transportation Department as a senior smart mobility, and he coordinates international activities. They both work on MaaS and will tell you about the lessons they learned. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Mirjam. I will share my screen now to view the presentation. Has it been seen, Claire?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not Claire, but I can see it now. Thank you, Marc. Yes, I'm Richard van Wulp from the city of Rotterdam, and together with Marc from The Hague, I will give you some insight. We will give you some insights in MaaS in our area, and our colleague Bastiaan Pigge, who is project leader of one of the MaaS projects, is also in the audience. Yes. Well, we will present our urban challenges, our approach, and primarily our examples. I will present the first two, and Marc will present the third one. Yes, the Rotterdam and The Hague, probably you know, are the second and third city of the Netherlands. Together, we form the metropolitan area of the Rotterdam, The Hague, with about 2 million inhabitants. And a very diverse city in all kinds of aspects, such as new and old city centers and so on. Yes, so that makes it very interesting, but of course we have similar challenges in our city. I hope for the next slide. Which probably are somewhat similar, of course, than us, similar to other cities. One of them is, of course, handling the growth. We have an enormous need of housing in the Netherlands. Housing prices are going up because there's too less of it. And we don't want them in the green area. We want them in the city center. So densification and how to organize this city. The second one is the climate problems we have, of course, and air quality. So this is kind of a usual suspect of one of our challenges. I will not go into detail on that, but it relates to the following challenge, which is livability, green, and health. So we have far more, we pinpoint far more the health problems and how to make the city more livable, more green, also for rain and that kind of things. So yeah, next slide. Yes. And the last challenge I will mention, which is very important for us in Rotterdam and The Hague, is inclusiveness, diversity of background, historic background, but also difference between men and women and education, higher education, more people spend. We already see it in Rotterdam that all kind of sharing services are primarily in the north of Rotterdam, where there is higher education level, higher income, and less in the south, which already we've seen, people have less mobility than others. That concludes my challenges part, and now shortly I will go into the approach. The Hague and Rotterdam both made a smart mobility policy. The Hague already finished it. We in Rotterdam are still busy in gathering all the items who will fall within the smart mobility. And one of the things I already can mention on the next slide is all kind of new priorities. Rotterdam is a big city with a new city center in respective to the other cities in the Netherlands. So we also always had a kind of car dominant road structure. And that's flipped around. So as you can see in this example, much more emphasis on walking, cycling, and all kind of shared and smaller kind of vehicles, and less about car domination. So this is super blocks, less more room for walking and an attractive city. And then we see if you look at what's coming to the city, we have to deal with all kind of new solutions, ideas, kind of vehicles, techniques, we have to deal with. And we've seen it earlier with Thomas and with Tim, with the MaaS ecosystem, where we have to deal with. I've shown some goals. We have our own role, our governance, how to deal with it. And they showed example of the different layers, which Thomas also mentioned: physical infrastructure, solutions, and the people who travel. And yes, next slide. That brings us also to kind of process. I will go not into detail, but similar to what Tim already mentioned, I think, how to deal with all these kinds of examples. And that's a nice bridge to the presentation of Marc's part.
Thank you very much, Richard, for the good explanation of our vision. Now I will mention two examples where we are working on the last years in our region. I will mention something about the project itself, but also the things we have learned from, and then from a city perspective. The ones I will mention are the MaaS pilot to Rotterdam The Hague Airport and also the e-scooters. Besides this, we also work on other MaaS-related subjects, such as car sharing or smaller light electric vehicles, but also on shared bike systems. So the first one I will tell about is the MaaS pilot Rotterdam The Hague Airport. This is a national pilot project initiated by the Ministry of Infrastructure and Environment in the Netherlands. It's focused on 7 different regions, which can be seen on the map. We focus on the different characteristics and also different target groups to answer a lot of questions about technical specifications, scaling possibilities, collaboration with public and private sectors, and also questions about the users of MaaS. One of the pilots is focusing on the region Rotterdam The Hague Airport. Rotterdam The Hague Airport is the 3rd biggest airport in the Netherlands, and the accessibility to the airport is really bad by public transport and really good by car. And we're trying to change this with our MaaS pilot to offer alternatives in mobility services. This is a pretty innovative project, because we have to work together with a lot of public parties in the region, but also with a lot of private parties, such as the national government, the local government, the airport, but also different MaaS providers like Transer, which can be seen on the sheet here. Where are we now? At this moment, we did a tender. There were 3 winners, 3 market parties, and there are 3 apps in development for 3 different target groups: one for employers of the airport, one for the national traveler, and one for the international traveler, and one for the traveler in the region. We are working pretty hard to get all the mobility providers on board. You can think about car sharing, mobility providers, e-scooter and bike providers. And we're doing a lot of beta tests to test and improve the apps which are in development right now. And the planning is to launch the apps for the public, so for the citizens, in May 2021. Okay, so now the key learnings. What have we learned the years? Well, first thing is get all the involved parties on the table. Public parties, private parties. It really helps to have all the public and private parties on the same table, so barriers can easily be discussed. Try also to approach the MaaS development as an organizational question, not as a technical question. And in the end, it also helps more if the parties on the table are all believers of MaaS. This makes a really good vibe on the table. This seems logical, but it's really crucial, I can say. And the other thing is, no offer in shared mobility is MaaS will never work. Crucial in the MaaS development is having enough shared mobility to offer in the cities. Think about shared cars, bikes, and e-scooters. By this, there is a total network of chain mobility. And another thing is that the offer not only has to be in big cities, but also in more suburban areas and smaller cities. You have a good, you will need a good offer in MaaS. Also, try to make appointments about MaaS in yearly public transit concessions. In the Netherlands, we have public transit concessions. These are long-term agreements, mostly between 5 or 10 years, about how to design the public transport. The government create these concessions. It is important to be aware that if you want to improve the mass development, you can do this via these concessions. The other thing I will dive into after talking about the digital layer is more about the physical layer, the wheels themselves. The next example I want to mention are the shared e-scooter system in Rotterdam and The Hague. We both have a permit system, which allows shared e-scooters providers to exploit their businesses in our cities. The e-scooter companies which are active are Felix, Check, and Go Sharing, and at this moment in Rotterdam are around like 2,000 shared e-scooters, and in The Hague around 1,500. We are having the shared e-scooter system now for a year or a bit longer than that. Some key learnings are work together and learn from other cities. You can do this via meetings where you can discuss the different challenges you're facing, so you do not have to tackle the same issue all over and over again in each city all over and over again. In the Netherlands, we work a lot together with the G5 cities, Eindhoven, Rotterdam, Utrecht, Amsterdam, and The Hague. During the implementation, stay in close contact with the different parties to solve possible problems quick. For example, during a hot summer day, a lot of mostly young people took the e-scooter to the beach in Scheveningen in The Hague. And in the end, people who were visiting the beach couldn't cross the sidewalks anymore because of a really big mess of those shared e-scooters. So we needed to make good appointments with the shared e-scooter companies and the living area near the beach. Now, the shared scooter companies made geofenced locations where people can park the e-scooters, and on busy days, scooter coaches are used to run everything smoothly. And the last one, during the start of the corona pandemic, e-scooter felt as a sort of safe alternative for people. Especially when the corona pandemic started, people were pretty scared to make use of public transit in the cities. And instead of that, we saw an increase of usage of e-scooters, but also in shared cars. In the scooter storage box also was a sort of spray, which could be used to disinfect the shared scooters. Well, this is the presentation for now. If you have any further questions, we also have learned a lot about the light electric vehicles or mobility hubs. You can ask them, or you can send us an email, and also make notice of the EU-funded MobiMix project. This is one where Rotterdam is currently into.
Okay, thank you,
okay.
Marc and Richard. We have a few questions. One is for Richard from Bonnie Fenton. I see your invited triangle of priorities doesn't seem to show any car parking. How much have you decreased, and what alternatives do you offer, and what are the direction of the reactions to this change?
The inverted triangle. Yes. Well, no parking is maybe more the icon than that's really not any parking anymore. We diminished last year a lot of parking on the streets, and we made some parking in garages around the city center, and that's mainly the city center, and that's big for us because we were a really car dominant city and a city center, so that was one big change. But we find it nowadays that it's not only for the city center, but only for other areas in the city. Why should only be the city center beautiful and nice and attractive? So we are working on ideas on that, how to change parking, maybe less car domination and maybe more, all the other solutions, possibilities, but you have to put them in place. One of the trials we did this year was we give the opportunity to people that they can park the car in a garage a little bit further away and not in the streets if they assign with all kind of sharing hub system which we implemented on that streets. And that was on the one hand very interesting for people. On the other hand, also a lot of people who were complaining about the way of piloting, of course, which is difficult with all kind of new ideas, and even in this year, where it's changed a lot, everything. So it's not a one-on-one, but we are still developing how we can improve that. Yeah.
And how do you react to the complaints? Are they a point of discussion in the city council, or?
Yes. In the city council, with the civil servants, how to deal with that, how to improve with the next pilot. Also with the businesses, because the business case in some ways is not perfect yet, and you want to improve that also. So the council asked for new pilots, so it's promising, and we are looking into that for next year.
And there's also a last question from Ron Bunau, I think to Marc. Were there any citizen groups involved in the partnership?
Not yet, but we are trying a lot of other projects where citizens are involved. For example, the Mobility Experience project, which have been done in Rotterdam, where people could make use of a MaaS offer for 1 month, and they could use all kinds of shared mobility options, and then they could give their opinion about that, where we could learn from in a later stage. But it's really important to also involve the users in MaaS, of course. So when we will launch our 3 apps in May, then we surely will take into account all the opinions of the citizens, and we will try to adjust the app on that and on their wishes to make a good product, which is also be wished by the people.
Okay. Thank you. There's one more question from Bonnie to Richard, I think. It's really interesting about the parking. Does it mean you build garages or just focused on existing ones? I think she means the garages outside the city center.
Yeah, in the last decade, we built some garages in the quarters, but we also looking into that, how to look in the future at about more kind of hubs, parking, these kind of things, and how to deal with that. But as my colleague mentioned in the chat, you can also look at Park for more ideas about our parking policy.
Well, thank you, Richard and Marc, for your interesting talk. We will now moving on to Rahel Känel, who is working as a mobility entrepreneur at Swiss Federal Railways for the Department of New Mobility Services. And her current project is YUMUV, on which she's working together with several regional transport companies. And Rahel will tell you all about YUMUV now. Go ahead, Rahel.
Thank you. Hello from my side. I would like to present to you YUMUV, a MaaS bundling pilot project in Switzerland. At the beginning of 2019, we at SBB, the Swiss Federal Railways, had an idea how we can improve the mobility in the cities, especially for city dwellers. In the next 8 minutes, I will present you our idea, give you an insight into what we have done so far and what we still want to achieve. My colleagues and I had an idea. We are convinced that the time has come for a new form of mobility that combines the possibilities of urban mobility in an easy, funny, and sustainable way. Now we want to set out this idea into reality. That's not only us from SBB. Because SBB is not mainly active in urban transport, we have joined forces with the regional transport companies. The transport companies in Zurich, Basel, Bern, and the SBB are joined their resources together to work on the previously explained idea. For this reason, we founded YUMUV. Together, we set the following focus for YUMUV. YUMUV is a pilot project and runs in the 3 partner cities for 1 year. In Switzerland, subscriptions for public transport are widespread, especially among the urban population. Therefore, YUMUV also focuses on subscriptions. With our research partner, it's ETH in Zurich, we want to find answers to defined questions in connection with MaaS and bundling. Here you can see an extract of our question catalog. Our aim is to get more information about the acceptance of MaaS in Switzerland and at the end of the pilot project. If and how to proceed with YUMUV after the pilot project is completely open and depends on the results. Let's have a look at our product. First of all, the app represents the key to urban mobility, which includes a variety of transport modes. With YUMUV, you get access to e-bikes, e-scooters, car sharing, and public transport. YUMUV provides you also with timetable information of public transport, route planning, buying a public transport ticket, and booking a vehicle. Let's have a closer look at the app. On the first screen, you can see the overview of all integrated mobility options in a city. Each dot represents an option. Second and third screen show the details and allow you to open the desired vehicle directly. In screen 4, you can see the route planning and the timetable. Screen 5 shows you an example of an intermodal routing. The customer can see how he can get from the actual location to the car by feet, and from there how he can get to the final destination by car. In YUMUV, we only integrate MSPs who offer a level 3 integration. This means the API from the MSP must be able to show the availability, make a reservation and a booking, and settle the payment. There is no link to the native app of the provider. Our goal is to integrate different MSPs and transport modes. We strongly believe this is the only way we can make a good offer to our target group, the urban population. We have the challenge that not all MSPs are active in the 3 cities, and there are not so many MSPs in Switzerland. Up to now, we integrated VOI, TIER, Bond, mobility, and public transport tickets from the local transport companies. We started YUMUV almost 2 months ago, and last week we started in Basel. Bern will follow in January. The products of YUMUV are the mobility subscriptions. Here you can see the subscription for Zurich. The aim of YUMUV is to create an attractive and simple multimodal mobility offer for city dwellers, which leads to leave their own car more often or not using it at all. For this purpose, different mobility subscriptions will be developed and tested. This slide shows you how the subscription looks like in the app. Every subscription customer sees whenever he wants how many free minutes he still has left. When he has used up all his free minutes, he can use YUMUV in pay-per-use mode. The subscription will be automatically renewed by 13 days if the customer has not cancelled the subscription by himself in the app. What we reached so far. In early September, with Go Live in Zurich, the media wrote about our pilot project. Furthermore, we were awarded as a top 5 project in the mobility section of the Austrian traffic. 338 projects applied for the award. last month, we collected customer feedback for the first time to get an impression. Here you can see a selection of them. We will interview our customers at frequent intervals in order to gain important insights for product development. Our next steps. First of all, we would like to promote the start in Basel and prepare the launch in Bern. We also want to design new bundles for Zurich and bring them to the market. It will be also necessary to integrate further mobility service providers. I hope I was able to give you a short insight to YUMUV. Do you have questions?
Thank you, Rachel, for this interesting talk on YUMUV. I can't see any questions now. I was wondering myself, did you build in anything to prevent people who would normally walk or take a bike from taking a hire car, for example?
First, we started with, or we implemented the bike and the e-scooter sharing. And since last week, we had the car sharing. So we have no experience about the car sharing up to now.
I have a question here. In Belgium, the railway company wants exclusivity related to selling tickets. That means MaaS operators will not get access to sell train tickets through their apps, with the exception that only one MaaS operator, Olympus Mobility, who is linked to the railway company, gets this permission. What kind of agreement and rules are there in Switzerland on this key issue to lever up MaaS?
It's actually the same because we are from SBB and we provide this service to sell the tickets. We can sell the tickets also in YUMUV in our app, but the other sharing or micro mobility or service providers, they can't sell the tickets in their own app.
Okay. So the public transport is only in YUMUV available.
Yes.
Yes. And do you have open access for all mobility service providers when they apply to your rules of planning, booking, and paying?
If they are able to integrate it in level 3, they can. We can talk about the integration in YUMUV. But the hurdle is most of the time it's the level of integration that the service providers they have to work on the level so that they can provide us with a level 3 integration.
We have another question from Ron Bunau. How did the original partners get together, which resulted in finding out they all had a shared vision? Was there an active marketing campaign and strategy developed, or did it just happen?
No, it just happened because we know all each other in Switzerland. We are not, it's not so big country. No, we know each other quite well. So we talked about this vision, and so we found each other. Yes.
Okay. I think there's another question here from Ritmar from Helmond. Is there an idea to provide a service or bundling for families instead of having 4 or 5 separate and expensive contracts?
Yes, it could be a possible subscription. We talked about this household subscription. Maybe next year we won't launch something. We're not sure yet what we want to do, but it could be an idea, yes.
Okay. I can't see any further questions, so I guess we'll just have to start with the plenary discussion. Thank you, Rachel, for your talk, and can I please invite the rest of the speakers to join me on the screen? Okay, Well, there have been a few questions. I've seen them, and I don't know whether they've been answered in the app, in the chat already. But there's been some questions about the role of users, end users, in the governance of MaaS. Rachel, can you comment on that? What's the role of end users in your project?
For the end users, we started as a pilot project for in the 3 cities. So we want to find out how the MaaS bundling is working in Switzerland and what insights we get from our customers. So we have not a lot of customers actually, and we do not want scaling up or something like that. So we want to get the insights how they handle with a MaaS subscription.
Is there anyone else who wants to comment on the role of end users in MaaS? Tim, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't understand completely what you want to know. The end user, it should be very easy to understand. And what is especially in that issue of inclusive mobility, it should be accessible for all, so that for less financial vulnerable groups, it should also be affordable to get access to the mobility services. And as we really are cooperating with a lot of commercial companies, this is really not always the case. And in that perspective, there is a role of the local authority or other authorities to close that gap. That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also really important that you make good appointments with the different mobility providers about data of users. So you can get all sorts of data, and by that data you can improve your policy and see if what you're offering is working or not.
And what about innovation? I mean, if you do want to bring a new service or innovate with a new mode or a new ticketing payment, how would you position the user in this discussion? Or do you have standard consultation processes for any sort of procurement? Under which process would you basically confirm that this is something that the people want and will adopt? Or you just go testing?
If I can react, we don't just test. For example, we did a very long participation process in The Hague, and we organized a lot of city meetings in different areas. And we simply ask, do you know what MaaS is? Do you know what shared mobility is? Have you ever used shared mobility? Did you like it? Why not? And by this information, we can also improve and upgrade.
But in Holland, we have this organization and this NGO, which is for the rights of users of public transport, and I can imagine that there will be something which is along the same lines in the future for people who use MaaS apps, maybe. Mm-hmm. So if I ask you the question, and I think Thomas asked it before, but if I ask it to the rest of you, who you think should be taking the lead in the rollout of MaaS, the public or the private sector? Marc, can you answer that?
We should take the lead. I think we, as my story told, we should do it together, because in the private sector there are a lot of innovations. They are also pretty fast, and I think we should take a role as government to facilitate this innovation and make sure the innovations are livable and safe, and we can do that by permits, for example.
Tim, would you like to
Yes,
comment?
yeah, my opinion on that is the only role of the authority, local or higher authority, is to define the service levels. What kind of quality do we need for our end user, and how our public domain is going to be used? All the rest is for the private partners who really have the power to innovate and to offer the services that we want. And in that perspective, when we had the presentation of Rachel, it is really top quality what the Swiss railway company is doing, and all this. Yeah, I forgot the word, but there's this MaaS app which has been developed. But and there also some service levels are defined. But I do have a big problem with the issue that there is an exclusivity in selling the tickets related to the MaaS companies that are linked to public transport operators. I don't have a problem that these links exist, but I do have a problem that other MaaS operators that are not directly linked to a public transport operator don't get access to sell tickets. If they fulfill some service levels, you should give them access, and this makes also competition and innovation.
Would you like to react to that, Rachel?
I know what you mean. It's defined by law in Switzerland.
Yeah, but it's really a problem in whole Europe. In Belgium, it's also the same
yeah.
problem.
Yeah. And for me, I think for MaaS, it's the public transport is always the backbone, especially in the cities. And I agree with Marc that we have to work together with the private companies and the public transport companies to bring MaaS further.
Thomas, would you like to react?
Yeah, I think it's a common problem that is faced everywhere, and the MaaS industry calls it the walled gardens. And indeed, in some cases, it's embedded in the law, like it is in Switzerland, and I think it's also similar in Belgium and in other countries. I want to think that as an industry and a group of cities, we have the ability to challenge this. And the way to do it is to always question, what can MaaS bring? Is MaaS really helping to, like Tim has showed us, improve inclusivity, provide with real fares that address the needs of those who are in difficulty? But in the case of Switzerland, I can talk about it because I live there. The SBB service is already extremely dense and extremely wide, and the service levels that are achieved by the public authority, public transit authority, that SBB, is already excellent. So I think it's all about what can MaaS bring and what is the vision that you want to bring. Let's take another example far from us, US, where everything is car-centric. There, MaaS in the forms of mobility and micro-mobility or mobility on demand can make a huge difference. And there is no law that allows us to, or that is protecting some kind of walled gardens from this instance. So I think it's all about asking again ourselves, what is MaaS for? What is the governance that is the most suitable to achieve a common objective? I think the key points that came up is it has to be about collaboration. And I also like the point that was mentioned by Marc, which is it's about managing mobility in its daily operation, its mobility management. But there is another layer that we need to not forget, is the capacity of planning. With the data that is extracted or that comes out of MaaS, planning and decisions can be enhanced enormously. This is just another example of the kind of value that needs to be brought to the public transit and the regulation, because it brings a lot of value from that angle too. So it's just some thinking around how can we break through the current silos.
There's maybe another topic I would like to address with you. This is more about now we are like finding out our own wheel in each country, and we are defining all sort of permit systems and all sort of things. But how do we work together as countries? For example, when I take the plane at Amsterdam and I fly to Paris or Barcelona, right now it's pretty hard, but when it's possible again, how can we make this international connection with MaaS? I know there is a MaaS Alliance, and at the MaaS Alliance we try to make this sort of agreements, but is this enough?
Can I try to?
Go ahead.
I think this is an extremely difficult topic, and it's beyond road transport, so that makes it even more complicated. I do agree that MaaS Alliance is doing a lot of things, and if PI is connected, or we can always try to have her commenting, or anyone from the MaaS Alliance. There is a very good example with the Antwerp region solutions, which I think are now looking at cross-border planning for road transport. So that is a good way to start. But I do think that this is almost the topic of a follow-up discussion, where I would happily bring the DG Move or any European authority on board to ask the question about what are the enablers or the blockers of this cross-border mobility. And at the core of it, I think we need to very quickly start to talk about the mobility account, the personal kind of mobility / CO2 account. What is enabled for as a personal portfolio of solutions, and what needs to be done so that individuals can manage that digitally, their transport life digitally. But I would definitely call on police to make it a follow-up session.
Thank you. There was a question that I hadn't picked up before for Tim, so I will ask it now. As a smaller city, do you feel you need much more investment in classic public transport? Or do you expect shared mobility and micro-mobility to meet much of your future demand, your sustainability needs?
Of course, is the answer yes. The backbone of the sustainable mobility offer in a mid-sized city like Leuven is cycling, but also public transport. Just simple public transport. And that can also be supported by the services of shared mobility services, but without having a high level public transport offer, we are really doing nothing. And also in Leuven or in Belgium or Flanders, this is a tough discussion, how much money and investment the taxpayers have to put in a high-level public transport offer and system. And of course, it is not only public transport anymore. Also, all our new mobility services should be connected to it. But if you don't have it, you can't connect to it. Just shared mobility on its own, I don't believe that this will be an alternative for the less sustainable transport modes. It's the combination public transport with shared mobility.
Okay, thank you. Also, MaaS is being talked about a lot, but the actual level of deployment is still relatively limited. So what do you think are the main barriers for MaaS to be rolled out on a wider scale? Tim, can you comment?
Yeah. I also wanted to pick up with what Thomas was mentioning. It's for me also a question. In one hand, I really believe that the MaaS service, like now developed by the Swiss Railway Company together with all the providers, I really believe this is really top level quality, and it gives also a certain comfort that this is stable. It doesn't appear suddenly because you know who is behind it. And the standalone MaaS apps and MaaS companies at this moment, I don't see a real business model, except that it will become one of the services of banks. When banks are offering it as as a total package in your bank account, you also have access to transport. So there is, in my opinion, the world of MaaS operators supported by the authorities, public services, and perhaps the challenge that it will be integrated in the bank services. Other business cases I don't see, but I am not expert enough to have a clear crystal ball on that.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on this question?
Well, I want to mention that, the wallet is the central, and payment already in MaaS, ticketing and payment is at the core of the enablement of the service. But the personal wallet is the convergence of all the services now, and everything is digitalized. I'd like to point out that there are many banks and credit card companies that are actively looking at the topic of transport to integrate. But it's the same with any sort of software company that is somehow already providing services across many verticals of industry or services in the city. What we are witnessing with MaaS is only the digitalization of all these services and the way we need to orchestrate the provision of the service from a digital perspective. The physical side of MaaS will always remain the challenge. But on the digital side of things, clearly, if we can think about a wallet, which is orchestrated by the banks, but I would say regulated in terms of number of kilometers and their related CO2 impact, for example, across countries, then we start to really look at a bigger picture that can provide a lot of benefits. So this is just innovative talks that I'm saying. It's nothing real, but there are already some startups that are emerging. I'd like to, without advertising, point the French company called Better Way, which is exactly thinking along these lines. So go and have a look, because I do think that some of our answers are...
Yeah, but for instance, the KBC Bank in Belgium, the MaaS app, which is used the most in whole Belgium, and they are really top, way ahead, it's the KBC app. It's a bank app. Everybody is using it who is client at the KBC Bank.
So, Rachel, do you have any comments on that?
I think for us in Switzerland, it will be the same. I think now we started as a pilot project and with the local transport authorities, but I think in future it will be that our MaaS product will be integrated somewhere else. But actually, I don't know where we can integrate or who is interested in, but I think it will be one solution that is helping to another, maybe in a bank account or so. I think it could be really a reason, or in the SBB app, because now we're talking about YUMUV. It's a separate app, and maybe we can integrate it in SBB app or in the apps from the local transport authorities. That will be one scenario for the future, I think.
Okay, Marc or Richard?
Yeah, I was thinking about the business case of MaaS and stuff, and I think if there can be a sort of link with restaurants, hotels in MaaS, for example, you open your MaaS app and you can also have a sort of discount on a hotel nearby. This could be really interesting for the MaaS providers to look into. Besides the more transport option, also offer a sort of city marketing option. I think this is not getting a lot of attention yet, but maybe this is one for the future.
Well, it is
Okay.
getting a lot of attention in Asia. The model pushed by Didi, Grab, and Gojek are exactly along these lines, service as a service. I also want to point out that you could think along the same ways of trying to harness the value of MaaS by looking at the benefits of it. So if MaaS is indeed deployed and proven to reduce transport emissions, for example, and pollution through multimodality, then can we think about ways of financing MaaS with the money that is saved on the health cost? As an example, which goes along the same lines of trying to harness what MaaS as a service provides with the value that it provides.
So what is MaaS contributing to the city goals? Try to make this really sharp. It's so important. How many cars are reduced from the streets? How much extra public space we have for green, for children, for playing, all sorts of things.
Yeah, but in that perspective, there is also the elephant in the room, where we as authorities really need to have control on. I, as an authority, I want to support MaaS providers. If we see the algorithm which is going to decide what kind of transport mode is advised to the end user, because if the MaaS operator is going to give a pre-advice to use a transport mode which is paying most of the money to the MaaS provider, then I don't fulfill my goals. If a MaaS app always is going to say you have to use the Lime bike, the Lime e-step, the Lime e-step, because Lime is paying more than my shared bike, then I don't want to pay for it as a local authority. And that's really also the elephant in the room. We don't know how the algorithms are running.
Yes. Well, we're nearly at the end of our session, and I think what Tim just pointed out is very important to take away from this session, that we need a lot of creativity in finding new partners and working together on making profitable MaaS business cases, but also have to remind that we have to have the right governance to make sure the societal goals are met. So I hope everyone has learned a bit more about that, and we'll go on with this discussion in the POLIS meetings. I would like to thank you all for contributing to this session. It was very interesting. And for the people in the session, I'd like to point out that on 11:30, there is a next session by DOT. It's about building responsible e-scooters and e-bike operations. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the expo and look for the bot booth. And at 13:15, there is a Meet the Dutch session on smart charging in the city, and which is on the stage. So I'd like to draw your attention to that. And thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you in the next session. Bye.
Thank you.